Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, October 2nd, 2008. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. But this week, we stick close to home as we interview the brewer of our local brew pub. Steve Mazylewski is the brewer at the Hog Haus brew pub in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and he took time to share some tips with Steve Wilkes and me on 3 of the beers that he's got on tap. Well, if you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. And as usual, you can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing. All one word. I want to start off by giving a shout-out to the guys over at Home Brewing Perspectives. Douglas Roszinski has come out of the baby-induced hibernation that he's been under, and he's posted a podcast. Mike the Hop Guy has not come out, so Douglas asked me to return a favor and appear on his show, since he came on the podcast a couple of times talking about Utah homebrewing legislation a while back. Douglas is going to the Great American Beer Festival next week, and he wanted some tips on getting the most out of the event. So that was fun. I enjoyed the conversation, and we managed to stay on the topic most of the time. So you can check that out at the Home Brewing Perspectives podcast. And speaking of GABF, Andy Sparks and I are going to be out there next week, and we got a bunch of things on our plate. So probably the best way to keep up with us, or if you want to keep up with us, you can do that as well. But probably the best way to keep up with us is to follow us on Twitter. Once again, I'm Basic Brewing, and Andy is Brew Lagerbeard. I don't know. I'll have to ask Andy what's up with that. I'm sure it's going to be quite a trip. And I look forward to seeing a bunch of you in person. If you see us, just come over and say howdy. Buy us a beer. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm just crazy this week, trying to take care of some clients before I'm out next week. So, if you don't mind, I'm going to go straight to the interview, and I'll try to catch up with the mailbag next week. But we've got a good conversation with Steve, and I've been meaning to do an interview with Steve Mazylewski ever since he came to Fayetteville last year. He's been brewing some really nice beers at the Hog Haus Brew Pub, and he's been gaining some fans in the local beer community. So it was with great pleasure that Steve Wilkes and I sat down with Steve to chat and sample some of his beers. We tried his Oktoberfest, pumpkin spice beer, and, of course, his IPA. Well, Steve Mazylewski, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thank you very much. Glad I could be here.
And also another Steve that you're probably familiar with, Steve Wilkes.
Hi, James, and it's great to be here with Steve and you.
And I apologize for taking so long to get down here to talk to you, but as usual, as what happens usually, the things in your backyard, get ignored, and you pay more attention to things that are far afield. But I'm really happy to finally get the time for both of us to sit down and talk.
Well, thanks. I just celebrated my 1-year anniversary in August, so it's been a year in the making, and I feel that the Hog Haus has come a long way from where it used to be. I pretty much completed the job that the previous brewers started here to make this something that Fayetteville can be proud of.
Give us a little background on where you come from.
Well, I was born and raised right outside of Chicago, and my father was a school teacher, so he started collecting beer cans in the 1970s when that was the popular fad to do. And actually, he taught 7th and 8th grade social studies. And one of his extracurricular activities was teaching beer can collecting as a hobby. Now, can you imagine trying to get away with that these days? The parents would have you strung up for all your encouraging drinking. And, back then it was a hobby. It was beer can collecting. So since he had summers off, our family vacations were touring breweries, and every brewery we went to, he would get a couple cans for his collection. Now, being a young boy, this left a huge impression on me. So we toured all the breweries in the Great Lakes regions from Cincinnati and New York breweries. Of course, the major ones like Stroh's in Detroit and Miller in Milwaukee and St. Louis. You had Budweiser and Hamm's in St. Paul. But a lot of the smaller mid-sized breweries were what really fascinated me. And back in the mid-'70s, there were no brew pubs or microbreweries. They were all fairly large industrial-sized plants. And you park a block down from where the beer's being made, and you could smell the wort boiling, and you're like, wow, does that smell good? And then you do the tour, and some of the smaller ones, the actual brewmaster was giving the tour. And I remember specifically being at Walter's Brewery in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and the brewmaster was just a big burly guy with a beard and overalls on, and he's giving the tour to my family, and I think another family was there. And he looks at his watch, and he's like, oh, it's time to add the hops. And he looks at me, and he's like, hey, kid, come here. And I was probably 7 years old at the time. He's like, I want you to climb up this ladder, and I'm going to hand you this bushel of hops to dump in the boil. And he's holding me by the seat of my pants so I don't fall into the kettle. And it was kind of an epiphany at a young age where it was like, wow, this is what I want to do when I grow up. So I took a lot of chemistry and biology and math in high school and in college, too. But actually in high school, you sit down with your guidance counselor freshman year, and he's like, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I says, I want to be a brewmaster. And he was a family friend, and he's like, I've been doing this for 28 years. He's like, I never heard anybody say such a thing. I've heard I want to be a bartender or own a restaurant and be a bar. I've never heard that. So he gets on this primitive Apple computer in the early 80s, and he's like, lo and behold, there's actually a school in Chicago that teaches how to make beer, being the world-renowned Siebel Institute of Technology. Upon further research, it was very expensive even back then to attend. At the time, it was probably $10,000 or $12,000 to do an 8-week diploma course to be a certified brewmaster. Being a son of a school teacher's salary, that was pretty hard to come by. So throughout high school and college, I was saving my money to go to beer school. When my hometown of Berwyn, Illinois, a small brew pub, actually the first in the suburb of Chicago since Prohibition, called the Wine Keller, opened up in Berwyn, and I wasn't even 21 yet. Now, this was a famous beer liquor store that had 575 bottled beers at one point, which was the most in the country, maybe second or third most in the world. Now, this is the late 80s when, beer was just starting to kick in. You had Fritz Maytag making good beer with Anchor, and Sierra Nevada was just getting started, and a couple other small places. But they had a 2-page legal-sized paper divided by countries of all the different beers that they carried in the liquor store that you could also get in the attached bar. The owner was a little German guy named Udo Hartung, kind of notorious in the brewing industry as being a ruthless, I don't want to mention the word, but he offered a free tour and tasting that was advertised in the paper. Now, I had just turned 21, and I was very excited that I can't believe there's actually a brewery in my hometown. How great is this? So it was about 3 days after I turned 21 that this tour was advertised. So I went there with my family and my girlfriend at the time, and owner Udo gave the tour, and during the tour he had mentioned that his son Christoph was the assistant brewer but was starting college in after summer, and he needed someone to fill his shoes. I was just like, okay, this is working out pretty good for me. At the end of the tour, I pulled him aside and I introduced myself, and I says, I've wanted to be a brewmaster since I was a young boy. I'm saving my money to go to Siebel. I would really love to help you out any way I can. He's like, oh, that sounds good. Why don't you start tomorrow? So 4 days after I turned 21, I had my foot in the door as an assistant brewer in a brew pub. I learned the ropes there, all hands on. Since he was pretty hard to work for, I decided to stay part-time assistant brewer and be an apprentice more than anything. He had plans of opening a second location, so he actually wanted to hire a full-time brewer to take over brewing duties, and he offered that job to me. Meanwhile, I had gotten a job at UPS and was making great money as a teamster and package loading and things like that, and still going to community college to further my brewing career, hopefully. I declined respectfully, But so he ended up hiring a full-time brewmaster, and throughout the course of the next 6 years, I think about 24 brewmasters came and went. So in a way, that's bad for business because it's always somebody else doing those recipes. But it was great for me because I learned from 24 different brewmasters, and some have gone on to be hugely successful, including like Nick Floyd from Three Floyds Brewery. He ended up working there 2 or 3 different times because he knew the system very well, and he was the one who actually trained me to become the full-time brewer after I decided, okay, it's either going to be driving a brown truck the rest of my life or brewing beer. So I decided to brew beer, and that was in 1995. So I've been brewing full-time since 1995. Bounced around Chicagoland quite a bit after that, and ended up here in Fayetteville.
Well, you are living the dream.
So to speak, yes.
Well, and you're making dreamy beers, which is my tortured segue toward our first one. And you are, tell us about this beer. This is your Oktoberfest.
This is an Oktoberfest, which obviously is a Vienna-style amber lager. This is loosely based off of a recipe I obtained while training at a lager brewery in Vienna, Austria. What a great place to learn how to brew that style. They were using all Austrian malt, which you can't get here in the States. But I closely matched it up with German malts. There's quite a bit of dark Munich malt, which really lends a nice body and definitely some color. And then there's some caramel 80 to give it just a little bit of caramelness, and that's where most of the color is coming from. And then there's just an ever so slight amount of debittered black malt to just kind of deepen those red hues that you typically see in an Oktoberfest.
Well, Steve, what do you think?
I'm just really impressed with the malty goodness of this. This isn't about hops. This is all about malt. And boy, is it nice. The finish is just lingering and luscious on your tongue and in your palate.
Yeah, it's a darkish, fairly dark copper color. And you're right. It's very malty and sweet, but yet not cloying. So that the hops add a nice balance. So for home brewers, what do you think is the key to achieving this style, or what are the tips that you would give the home brewer toward brewing something like this?
Temperature is probably your most critical thing for brewing a lager, and that's why a lot of home brewers, I think, don't brew a lot of lager styles, is because they don't have the means to control temperature. 55 degrees is as warm as I would go in fermenting any lager. I know a lot of lager breweries that start fermentation as low as 48, and therefore, since it is slower, it's going to obviously ferment a lot longer of a time. Typically, our lagers are 10 to 14 days lagering. I usually start them at 55 just to make sure that they're going, and then lower them down to about 51 and let them complete their fermentation there. And I'll lower them a degree a day until I get them to freezing and give it a nice long lagering time. The second most important thing was I think would be the aging of it. Lagering means to store, so you want to make sure that you're not trying to rush it along. We give our lagers a minimum of 4 weeks to mature here. That's after fermentation. So by the time I even consider filtering it and putting it on tap, it's already 6 weeks old from when it was born, I guess. But I've worked in lager breweries where certain styles need a lot longer, typically Box and Doppelbox. I've let my box age as long as 4 or 5 months, letting them lager at that super cold temperature. And at that point, they drop so clear and all the yeast flocculates out of suspension that you really don't even need to filter it, which is really nice. I've never been a fan of filtering. It's just we can talk about that further if you'd like.
Well, sure. I mean, what is your perspective? Why would you not want to filter?
Well, for me, certain styles should be crystal clear, like a light beer. If you're doing a light beer, it better not be hazy or cloudy or chunky in any way. A Pilsner style is very nice to have it crisp and clean and crystal clear. But When you're filtering beer, all you're doing is stripping away flavor and aroma. You're losing beer in the process, and you're potentially risking another source of infection because it's got to run through a filter and all those valves, and whether it's a diatomaceous earth filter or a plate and frame filter, it's another piece of equipment to clean out and sterilize before and afterwards, and it's all for getting clear beer. To me, it doesn't make too much sense. I know a lot of beer judges or in competitions, they immediately take off points if your beer has a slight haze to it. Well, it may have a slight haze to it because it is unfiltered, and it may be an absolutely delicious beer, but it's not going to score as high as one that tastes worse because the one that tastes worse is actually crystal clear for that style. And it's always been an annoying factor for me that a lot of people expect to have crystal clear beer when it's not necessary. In a brew pub environment, we can get away with that a lot more. I mean, being in Fayetteville, I think people are used to crystal clear beer, so all of our beers are filtered except for our wheat beer, which is purposely cloudy. But in other cities, the last brewery I worked at, I filtered my light beer and my Pilsner, and every other single style I had was unfiltered. There's strains of yeast that flocculate better than others, and that will also help clarify your beer naturally. I also had the benefit at the last brewery to have conditioning tanks. So after primary fermentation, I would do a secondary fermentation in a conditioning tank where I then let it age. So you're letting that yeast settle out twice and coming up with a clearer product as well. But the most common question I probably get from homebrewers is, how do I make my beer nice and crystal clear? And my answer to them is always, why do you want crystal clear beer? And it's almost impossible to do on a homebrewing scale if you're bottle conditioning your beer and priming it with sugar to get your carbonation and things like that. You just, if you let it sit long enough and properly decant it into a glass, it's going to be clear. But I always tell the homebrewers that, clear beer is not necessary. It sure looks pretty, but I know people have rigged up fancy, elaborate pool filter systems and cartridge filters for their home brew, and it's again, you're stripping away flavor and aroma, and you're losing product and risking potential infection.
Yeah, I think I feel the same way. If I get chill haze or something like that in my beer, I'm not so worried about it. Of course, I'm not going to enter it into a competition. I'm mostly worried about how it tastes rather than just how it looks. We've talked about in casual conversation in times past, we've talked about decoction. Did you do a decoction with this Oktoberfest?
Not in this system. It's not designed for that. I attempted a decoction mash here once and completely missed my target temperatures. This is a solid copper vat here, and it retains heat like you wouldn't believe. Even shutting the flame off, because it's direct fire, shutting the flame off well before my target temperature, it surpassed it to where I ended up just doing a couple of crazy rests, and in the process ended up sticking grain to the bottom of it. I do have a drag chain to make sure that, because it's also our mash vessel, it's to prevent that, and the only way I could get it off was actually by climbing into the vessel with a hammer and a screwdriver and chiseling the remains off. The good news is it did not affect the beer whatsoever. If anything, it helped it achieve a much more malty flavor. But this system here is not designed. On a homebrew system, it's not necessary. The grains these days are so highly modified that you don't need to do decoction mashing. And to use an example, the last brewery I worked at, again, it was a decoction system designed for lagers. I ended up buying Durst Turbo Pilsner, thinking, oh, this is great. It's even more modified, and then I can decoct it and come up with incredible efficiencies and specific gravities that are beyond belief. No, wrong idea. I had to actually order under-modified malt to use if I was decocting, because it would turn to gum on me, and I was not able to lauter anything. There was a couple stuck mashes I had where I could not get anything to drain out of my lauter tun. Underletting, poking it with a stick. I tried everything to the point where on 2 of them I actually opened up the lauter tun door and let hot, sticky mash flow all over the brewery. And an hour and a half later, you got it cleaned up.
Wow. So even, even though it's not necessary, you're saying that even if you want to just add some flavors and some kind of decoction character, you wouldn't advise it?
I would advise it. It's fun to do. It adds a much longer time to your brew day, but the end result is better than just a single infusion mash or a quick step mash. You are definitely extracting a lot more of the malty flavors and aromas and those nice bread-like flavors and aromas from the malt. And if it's done properly, it can definitely be worth your time and effort. Just make sure that you use under-modified malt. Don't be using like the turbo malts or these super highly modified American malts. Go and get some decent German malt like Weyermann or some under-modified Durst. And some of the English varieties like Simpsons and Crisp. A lot of those work really fine with decoction mashes as well.
So what do you think is the advantage to a decoction mash? What are those characters that you're looking for in a lager that decoction brings out?
Well, for one, you're going to end up getting all your saccharification done in the malt. So you're going to get better efficiencies. And like I said, it's just going to deepen those malty characters and bread-like flavors and aromas in a beer. And it also will deepen the color as well. And that's one thing that I had to learn by trial and error as well. I've tried to brew pale box on a decoction, double decoction mash, and it would turn out to be a copper color, and that's just because of the caramelization that you're getting when you're actually boiling mash. And it was disheartening because that wasn't what I was going for, but the end result, the beer was just fantastic anyway.
Yeah, for those who want to play with their beers and don't mind having long brew days, decoction is a fun thing to do. But if you're just wanting to get through the brew day and get your beer brewed, it can be a trying experience.
Yeah, and there's some wonderful books on decoction mashing that really explain it in deep detail. A lot of the style books that are written out there available through the Brewers Association website. Those books, especially the ones on lager brewing, like the one on Bock beer, is really interesting, and they go through a lot of the different mash programs that some of the German breweries do, and all the temperatures, double and triple decoction. I've done a triple decoction once, and the mash program alone was 6.5 hours, and that was for a Doppelbock. Then you're talking about a 2-hour runoff and a 2-hour boil plus cooling and cleaning and everything, and it ends up being about a 13 or 14 hour day when it's all said and done.
So it better be good.
Hard to make a profit with a day like that.
Well, let's go on and move to another seasonal that you've done, and this is your pumpkin spice beer.
Yes, this is a pumpkin ale. Really a fun beer to work with. They can be done in numerous ways. And I had spoken to you earlier about how, a lot of brewers try using real pumpkin. They have to, toast it in the oven, and they're mashing in with it, and they get stuck mashes. And I've heard so many horror stories. My pumpkin ale doesn't use real pumpkin in it. I am using spices and flavorings only. And a little goes a long way. And that would be my advice to everybody is, you'd rather have it under spicy than too spicy, unless you have something you're going to be blending it with down the road. This is a 10-barrel brewery, so we're brewing in approximately 310-gallon batches. All of our spices are added after boil. I do a quick 5-minute whirlpool and a 30-minute rest to let all the trub settle. And the spices are only in contact with the wort for about 20 minutes after boil. So about 5 minutes during the whirlpool and about 15 minutes as everything's settling out. And we're talking for a 310-gallon batch, I'm using less than 2 ounces of spices, of the different spices. What I used was fresh grated ginger root, right from Ozark Natural Foods. I'm using crushed nutmeg, crushed allspice, cinnamon sticks, and some pure vanilla extract. And less than 2 ounces of each of those in a straining bag that's just hung into the kettle. After 20 minutes, I pull it out and I continue my normal cooling. The flavor doesn't mature right away, especially when it's fermenting and all the yeast is still in suspension. As the fermentation is over and the yeast settles out, you start to get some flavors. In this case here, I wasn't quite satisfied with the final result, so I bought pumpkin pie spice, pre-mixed, pre-made, pre-crushed, and I dry spiced the pumpkin ale. Twice, actually. I dumped about 4 ounces directly into the fermenter from the top and let that settle out, and then I filtered the beer, and as the filtered beer was going into the serving tank, I dry spiced it with about another 4 ounces of pumpkin pie spice. It really, really adds a lot of flavor and mostly aroma, but it does pick up the flavor a couple of notches.
Well, speaking of flavor, let's have a taste. I'm drooling all over the microphone here. I did a pumpkin pie spice beer that was just a standard ale, and it turned out pretty good. Actually, it was an extract beer, and so I decided, well, I'll do a wheat beer with the same spices, and the lighter body of the wheat with those same spices. It wound up. It was almost like liquid potpourri.
Wow. And
I don't throw beers away. I keep them and let them sit for a while, and after a year, I brought it back out again, and it was actually pretty drinkable. And after 2 years of sitting in the bottle, it turned out to be a really nice spice beer. So the character of spices do change over time.
That's very true. This just came on tap last week on the 23rd of September, and when it first comes out, all those flavors are fresh and alive. As it ages, different spices will come out more than others, and after about 3 weeks to a month, all the flavors just kind of meld together, and it's an entirely different animal than when it first came out. Everything kind of mellows out and kind of gets absorbed together, and it makes it very interesting to see how the beer progresses as it's being served.
Is there a place in the timeline that we're on where you think the beer is optimum? In other words, is it best when some elements are coming to the forefront, or is it better after it has time to really meld in with itself?
I think both, actually. I like it when it first comes out and it's really fresh, almost in your face, fresh spice. But I also like it as it mellows out, 4 weeks down the road, where your palate is kind of trying to work on, I know it's there, but what quite, is it? And that's what the fun part is trying to detect all the different things that are added in there. But definitely when it first comes out, I think I might like a little bit better, just because it's like, wow, fresh spice.
Yeah, this is wonderful. The aroma is really nice. I want to say potpourri in a good way, and not it's not overpowering, but it's kind of a holiday. It just gets you in the mood for the holidays, and then the flavor is delicious as well. And it makes me wonder if it would be, instead of separating the spices out and buying them individually, I'm just wondering if just using just the pre-mixed pumpkin pie spice in the first place wouldn't be a good thing to do for homebrewers. It
would definitely be a good thing to do. You're not exactly sure. There's not a list of ingredients on a lot of the pumpkin pie spice. It just says spices, so you're not sure exactly what's in there. It's one way to make it even if you're going to do it regularly. But I think it's neater to control exactly, and what's going in, and that way you'll know what you like, and you can change something next time if you're not quite happy with it.
That's true. You can customize better if you know exactly what's in your spice mix.
Yeah, and a quick note on spices. I worked at a brewery, and we tried to do a clone of Anchor's Christmas Ale, which we all know was really heavy on the clove a lot of times, but they changed the recipe every year, which I think is a really neat thing to do. And we would do a clone of that beer at a brew pub I worked at. This was when I was still the part-time assistant, and they switched full-time brewers, so the new full-time brewer was going off of last year's recipe, and he substituted ground cloves instead of whole cloves, which are going to be a lot spicier, and he used the same weight. Now, what the beer he ended up brewing was clove juice, and it was completely undrinkable. We ended up mixing in the half barrels. We would do half of our amber ale with half of our Christmas ale, and it was still overpowering. There was about 4 or 5 customers who thoroughly enjoyed it, and they would sit at the bar and smoke their clove cigarettes and drink this beer, and they were in heaven. But the 99% of other people that tried it couldn't finish more than a sip or two. And the boss, being a frugal German, was not willing to dump it out, and we actually had that on tap until July. And I was like, well, let's call it Independence Ale.
Now, did the clove mellow over time?
Not too much. It was just so overpowering that it never did mellow out much.
Well, this is a wonderful beer. It gets me in the mood to brew another one myself. But
yeah, no kidding. I feel so good because the other night you and I had one of these, and we were sitting there kind of dissecting it, and I was like, I get some vanilla. So it made me feel so good when I found there really was some vanilla in it.
Yeah, it does have kind of a creamy mouthfeel, and that vanilla goes very well with it. What are the hops that are with this?
I just used English EKG, and for the aroma, and there was for bittering, and there's no aroma hops added. You want the spices to come through on that. You just want enough hop bitterness to balance the maltiness. You can't rely solely on the spices to balance that out. So there's just enough hops to equal out and give it just a touch of balance. But you definitely want the spices to come out in the forefront and be what the beer is all about.
Now, speaking of hops, you have the last beer on the tray. There is your IPA. So why don't we have a taste, and you can tell us about your beer. Now, this is there's some definite beer lovers in this town and home brewers.
Oh yeah.
So cheers, by the way.
Cheers.
So this is kind of a high pressure situation for a local brewer like yourself to brew an IPA. Tell us about your beer.
Well, I'll tell you first that when I started this position in Fayetteville, coming from Chicago, I kind of had a mindset of what I'm going to be up against. And, just being a simple Chicago boy, I'm thinking, rednecks and hillbillies, and it's Arkansas,
Well, we do have that.
We do have that. I was very, very pleased and slightly surprised to see that, 95% of the people in this town are just like people from Chicago. They're educated, they're well off, they know beer, and I was very impressed with the locals and how they knew beer, especially the local homebrew, the Flops group. Those guys love good beer, they know good beer, and I was really happy to see that it wasn't just that. Now, there is that other 5% where you see here and there, and you're like, okay, they're from the hills, they stand out. But no, it was an eye-opening experience, and I'm very sure that being a college town helps quite a bit. And you got the influx of students every year, and the teachers and the staff who, are all very well-educated people, obviously.
And we also have corporate influences like Tyson Foods and Walmart and all those corporations that bring in people from other areas as well that kind of add to the diversity.
Yeah, I've met a lot of people from around the country that are here, and that's, like you said, the big corporations bring in a lot of people here. When I started the job, though, the IPA that was on tap here was more of an English IPA, there was very little hop character. Even for a pale ale, I thought it was on the weak side of hops. I definitely radically changed that recipe and took it from 3 hop additions during the boil to 6 hop additions and then a 7th dry hop addition. It's come a long way, and this is definitely a beer lover's beer. Unfortunately, it's the most expensive to make, and since this system that I'm brewing on is so poorly designed that I get really horrible yields, final yields out of here. Out of a 10-barrel batch, I'm lucky to get 7 barrels because of all the trub that's involved with that many pounds of hops. For a 10-barrel batch, I'm putting about 20 pounds of hops in this recipe. Likewise, my least hopped beer, which would be our Woodstock Wheat, gets about 4 pounds. So when we had the hop scare towards the end of last year, I actually stopped brewing IPA because, hey, I could make 5 batches of wheat or 1 batch of IPA. So the owners and I made the decision to cut out brewing the IPA until we had hop secured. Luckily, I've been in the industry long enough, and I have many contacts. And I actually did not know about the hop scare until I went to order hops towards the end of September last year. And I called up Hop Union like I did for the last 12 or 13 years. And I said, I need to order hops. And they said, "We're not, do you have a contract?" And I says, "No." And he says, "Well, we are not selling hops." And I laughed, thinking she was joking. And she said, "No, seriously, we're not selling hops on call anymore." And I says, "Okay." I says, "I've been dealing with you for 13 years, and this is how you're going to treat me?" And she says, "Sir, I don't think you understand the seriousness of the situation." And I says, "Well, you just lost a customer, So I called up a buddy of mine who I've dealt with for years, and he explained the situation to me and highly recommended that I get him figure out what I need for the next brewing season and get that to him, and he would try to help me out. He was actually on a waiting list to get a contract for hops. And being a good buddy of mine, he bumped me up to the top of the list and set me up for this year. Now, the hops this year weren't even available until April. So I went from September to April with what I had in stock and begging and pleading with other people I know to sell me, 11-pound box here and 11-pound box there. And the only way I made it was by cutting out brewing hoppy styles like an IPA.
Did you find that you had to change some hops? Did you have to alter your recipes?
The recipes were being altered on a regular basis, substituting this for that, and I'm out of that now. I have to use this. Luckily, most of the customers I don't even think really noticed, but that's the beauty of being in a pub situation. And I like being a pub brewer, not a microbrewer, where, you work in a microbrewery and you're making the same beer day in, day out. It better taste exactly the same because that's what people are used to. And it's almost being a factory worker at that point, even though you're doing what you love. I love being in the pub environment where I have that freedom to substitute hops or substitute grain or change a recipe and try and tweak it a little bit more. And 90% of the customers probably wouldn't even notice a change. Those people that are really receptive and have a great palate might say, "Hey, Steve, what did you do different this time? I really like it," or "I don't like it. Could you put it back the way it was?"
That's one of the things that I like best about the hobby of home brewing and going to brew pubs. Is what Steve just said. That, I make the same beer on paper over and over again, but it's not really quite the same beer. My system isn't perfect by any means, and so it changes. But that's the cool thing about this hobby.
Plus, you tweak as you go along.
I can't help but tweak.
So, this is a wonderful beer.
Yeah.
The hops are the hop aroma and the hop flavor are nice and fresh. And talk to us about your hopping strategy. What hops did you use? What weight did you put on the hopping strategy, so that kind of home brewers can kind of get a picture of your philosophy?
Well, you're going to use a lot of high alpha hops in the beginning of the boil, and as for your bittering characteristics, I typically like the 4 C's everybody talks about. Those are really good ones to use, but they're extremely hard to get these days. Nugget is another one of my... Nugget and Chinook is what are my bittering hops in here. All my flavoring hops in the middle of the boil are all EKG, East Kent Golding. That's where all the flavoring hops come from. And then I finish it up. The old recipe called for nothing but Cascade in the finish. Everybody loves Cascade in their IPAs. However, Cascade is at such a premium that I've been substituting half of the Cascade recipe for U.S. Tettnang, which sounds surprising at first, but the U.S. Tettnang I've been getting is surprisingly close smell-wise to Cascade. I mean, it is a world-renowned, I believe, a noble aroma hop, but the freshness of it and the greenness of it is very, very close to Cascade, for me anyway. So I've been substituting that because when I did figure out what hops I needed for the year, I declined in my head to think of dry hopping. So my pale ale and my IPA get 4 pounds of dry hop per batch. Okay, so I'm going to be a little short on the Cascade if I dry hop everything with solely Cascade. So I've been substituting it with U.S. Tettnang with extremely wonderful results. I think I like my pale ale better with U.S. Tettnang in it than with Cascade in it. And the customers agree. They've said the last 2 batches of pale ale have just been absolutely outstanding. They're like, "What are you doing different?" And I'm like, "Well, it's just changing the things around one little bit by one little bit."
Well, in a way, that the hop crisis is good in that it kind of has shaken up the way we think about the hops that we use, and it's kind of forced us to be more imaginative in our brewing.
It exactly does, and it's just one of those things that we'll get through. I mean, we've survived Prohibition, we've survived world wars and grain rationing, and there's been shop shortages before. The unfortunate thing is it's just become a lot more expensive to brew beer, and that's hurting a lot of the small to mid-sized people, where the large companies can absorb that, and instead of spending $100 million on advertising like Anheuser-Busch does, they'll probably, spend $90 million instead. But it's hurting a lot of the smaller companies to where it's a shame when you go to the liquor store and you see a 6-pack of beer for $11.99, and you're like, that's $2 a bottle for, it's great beer, but who can afford that these days?
I look at beer the same way I look at gasoline. I try not to look at the sticker because I gotta have it.
Well, that's why homebrewing is so nice too, because you can make exactly what you want, and it's cheaper.
So, you have bridged or kind of solidified the bridge between the Hog Haus and the homebrewers in the area. From everything that I hear. So what can you tell, what piece of advice can you give to homebrewers generally overall to improve their beers? Or what's the thing that you counsel most people who are homebrewers who are looking for your advice?
Wow.
That's a big question.
Yeah. I think I've touched briefly on it before about temperature. It's one of the most critical factors in making beer, and sanitization. You need to be clean. And the whole time I've been here, I've tried a lot of homebrew, and I don't think I've had a bad homebrew yet. Hats off to the people in the Fayetteville, Northwest Arkansas area, because they're making awesome beer. And I've had a lot of bad beer in Chicagoland. And I'll be brutally honest with them. If I don't like it, I'll tell them. I'll tell them exactly what the infection is and what I think they did wrong and how they might go about fixing it. I won't butter them up. If I don't like something, I'll say, it's really astringent or whatever. But the homebrews I've had since I've been here have been outstanding. Stay clean, brew what you like, and watch your temperatures. it's pretty crucial, especially as hot as it gets down here in the summertime and as cool as it doesn't get here in the wintertime. Invest in a small chest freezer or something, or something to control your temperatures. There's not a lot of basements in this area, I've found out, where everybody in Chicagoland has a basement, and they usually maintain a nice 62 degrees year-round, pretty much. Where you don't have that luxury here. And if you're going to be a serious home brewer, I would highly recommend using that old refrigerator, or getting a chest freezer with a new thermostat in there to control your temperatures where you want them. That would probably be my best advice.
Well, I brought you a six-pack of homebrew, so I hope that the streak of no bad homebrews is extended. But I certainly appreciate your time, and I appreciate your expertise and your beers, and thanks for coming on.
All right, and if anybody wants to come by and say hi to me, feel more than welcome, and just ask for Steve, the brewmaster at the Hog Haus.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve.
All right.
Well, thanks again to Steve Mazylewski and, of course, Steve Wilkes. You can taste Steve Mazylewski's beers on tap at the Hog Haus Brew Pub on Dixon Street in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And if you get to meet him, be sure that you say that you heard him on this program. I'm sure that'd be fun for him to hear. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. You can check out our low-tech lagering and decoction mashing DVD on basicbrewing.com, where you can see our own Steve Wilkes do a single-step decoction mash. And you can follow me through a lager fermentation in the middle of summer, where I don't use a dedicated chest freezer. You can also find our original DVDs. In Basic Brewing Introduction to Extract Home Brewing, we walk you through the extract brewing process step by step from boiling to bottling. And in Basic Brewing Stepping into All Grain, we take you through the all grain process, of course, from milling your grain to collecting your wort. We got combo deals on our site. And you can also see a listing of fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, a homebrew shop, you can order it online from us in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. We've got shirts of different colors. We've got a new picture on the gallery of Jim, I believe. Sorry, Jim. It wouldn't be sorry, Jim. It'd be sorry, Jim, who sent us a picture from Munich, from Oktoberfest. So awesome. I'm very, very jealous. And you can tell I'm very, very disorganized. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are On-Air GT Mobile HD TV Receiver and DVR for PC, and Camouflage Flip-Flop Sandals, men's 11 and 12, camo, black, gray. Thanks again, everybody. And remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. And we appreciate your support. We really do. That's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening. Even though I'm crazy, I'm telling you. I'm James Spencer, as well as being crazy. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson, our buddy in Austin. Basic Brewing Radio is a hurried production of active voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody, and hope to see you in Denver and around parts of Colorado next week. You'll also hear from us next week. So long, everybody.